Yahoo Finance's Javier David, who penned today's morning brief newsletter. Javier, good morning to you. Did I read this right? You were writing, or you did write about Alan Greenspan?
I did. Guilty as charged. For some reason, he has been on my mind lately, specifically with respect to our sort of debate about inflation and whether it's transitory vis-a-vis, more long-lasting. Sort of wondered what he might make of the current situation. He hasn't been very vocal or very public, but thought it was a good time to sort of revisit some of the themes that he used to hammer home, namely price stability, quiescent inflation is one of his choice words. And he used to talk a lot about the effects of wages on price pressures.
Yeah, and Javier, I was glad that quiescent is not the main word. It's now transitory. It's a much simpler word to understand in this environment. But I think the wage conversation is interesting in terms of where it sets the price level, but then how the price level itself can be inflationary or not as inflationary, perhaps, at least as we report the data, right? Because we're in this interesting cycle where the price level for worker wages or the stuff we buy may indeed get set higher on a permanent basis. But if it doesn't increase more than 2% a year, the Fed may not necessarily feel compelled to be more aggressive in its policy stance.
Well, that's actually a very interesting observation, because one of the analysts that I spoke with over the last several weeks mentioned that one of the defining characteristics of the environment that we're in is it's a higher level of inflation that a lot of people in reality have not been used to. We are used to seeing somewhere in the order of 1% to 2%, and it seems as if the level, regardless of whether the current environment is in fact transitory inflation or more longer lasting, most people have become accustomed to seeing inflation or prices at a certain level. And it really does seem that what we're seeing, regardless of whether you think this is temporary or more longer lasting, people are not necessarily comfortable or not necessarily used to seeing prices at this particular level. So we're entering what may very well be a new range, whether that's a comfortable range or something that I'd be very surprised if we were seeing double-digit inflation again. But the truth of the matter is, years ago, we were almost talking about the U.S. being in a deflationary spiral because inflation was so well contained. But it seems as if we are at least, it's fair to say that we're in an environment where people are not accustomed to seeing prices at this level, and they might get a little bit of sticker shock, and they are.
And, Javier, maybe to broaden it out, to wrap it up, I mean, in the current market environment, the role the Fed plays in markets means that every Fed chair is a memorable name, and no one's going to forget what the Bernanke era was like, Yellen era, so on and so forth. But I do wonder, the way that so many investors today benchmark to the Greenspan era, if Powell, if he gets nominated to a second term, is not reshaping the Fed framework the way that I think Greenspan kind of did. I mean, Volcker had an aggressive stance because he had to. He was in a crisis moment. But Greenspan set the table for what has essentially been 30 years of policymaking, and it does feel a little bit like that's come to an end here. And maybe Powell is the more impactful, player for the next 30 years of our lives.
Right. Well, Powell, just as Bernanke was, will sort of become synonymous, I think, with crisis era policy. So both of these guys sort of came in guns blazing, QE. We were in a specific moment, or a moment where the economy was sort of poised at a precarious moment, and they had to act. The Powell era, I think, again, will be defined in two phases. One, with the constant fighting between he and the guy who appointed him, and what he did to respond to COVID-19. So whether or not he gets a second term, I think his legacy will largely be defined by the post-COVID era and what happens from here. Is this really transitory inflation? It remains to be seen. But if we start seeing prices skyrocket, unfortunately, his name will be synonymous with that as well.
It's interesting, guys. I was just thinking, Jay Powell doesn't have a nickname. I mean, Greenspan was called the Maestro. What's the nickname for Jay Powell? Anyone want to take a guess?
Money machine goes burr.
Say, Javier?
I haven't given it much thought. I don't know if there's any sort of, well, if prices are more than longer lasting, it's going to be something like, I don't know, inflationary Powell or inflationary Jay. I don't know.
What do you got, Myles?
I think we're going to have to go with J Powell for now and then just, figure it out later. You can't be the maestro in real time. Maestro is like an ex post kind of judgment on how you manage a situation. So J Powell is going to have to go for now.
And it also bears mentioning that Maestro was a nod to Greenspan's beginnings as a music student. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but he started out as a Juilliard.
That's a good one. All right, well, for right now, we'll just call him Big J. Javier, David, good to see you.